Hi, everyone. This is Lauren Baker from Search Engine Journal. Welcome to today's special SEJ webinar with Martin Splitt, Developers Advocate at Google. Hey, Martin, how's it going?
Hi, Lauren. Pretty good. How are you doing?
Pretty good. Always nice to see you. Always nice to talk to you. So we have folks coming in right now. So if
Ooh.
you're here, what I'd like to do kind of to get things started is go ahead and drop in the chat where you're from, like where around the world. Because Martin, where are you based at right now?
I'm based out of Zurich, Switzerland.
I love Zurich. It's been a long time. I hope to get there soon. So you have folks coming in from Nottingham, Costa Rica, Norway, Quebec,
Kansas
Tehran,
City.
North Dakota, London, Serbia. Fantastic. So sounds like we have Brazil. So we have a really good mix of
Whoa.
folks from all over the world coming in. And we might have some international SEO optimization questions as part of that. But the bulk of what we're doing today is all going to be around semantic HTML. What it is, why it's important, what makes it important for Google, and overall understanding and optimization of your site content, as well as the way that your site is structured. If you have questions for Martin, just to let everyone know, there is a Q&A box as well. So I see that everybody's been chiming in the chat to where they're from. So in the Q&A box, you can ask questions for Martin. And as you see those questions coming in, you can also vote on the questions that you like, almost like Dig used to be back in the day, or kind of copycat that made much more success is Reddit. And go ahead and you can vote up the questions that you like and that you're happy about. And I will make it a point to address the ones that get voted up. So as we're presenting or as we're speaking today, please go ahead and ask questions in the Q&A box. That's about it for now, since this is a special webinar where I don't believe we're doing polls or anything like that. So we're keeping it pretty basic. Martin, how about if you introduce yourself to the audience and then we can get started with the Q&A.
All right. Yeah. So my name is Martin Splitt. I'm a developer relations engineer at the search relations team at Google. And I work with people like Lizzie Sassman, Gary Eish, and John Mueller that you might have heard before.
Yes. Cool. And could you go over a little bit about semantic SEO, what it is, and why it's important?
Sure. So with HTML, what we do is we generally structure the content and describe different pieces of our content on the website. The most obvious ones are headlines or links that take you somewhere, some specific other place, or images, which, well, surprise, surprise, include images into your document. But there's plenty more, and a lot of them are being underappreciated, I would say. There are so many different ways to represent information on your page and make it meaningful. So instead of just having like paragraph, 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 depending on what you're trying to do, it might make sense to represent the things that you're putting down there as a table, or maybe as a list, as an ordered list, as an unordered list. You can build kind of like these accordion type of UIs with, I think it's the dialogue and summary elements. There's like so many HTML elements that allow you to give more specific information, not just to search engines, but also to accessibility tools in terms of what these different parts and pieces and bits and pieces mean. And generally, the more semantics you include into your markup, the less guessing technology has to do to understand your markup automatically or your content automatically.
Excellent. So we do have some questions coming in already. One question is the exclusion of the title tag and the usage of headers within the Google results themselves in any way or format related to semantic HTML? And is there anything that can be done within semantic HTML to better communicate to Google what should be served within the search results themselves?
Right. So in general, the title information is based on the semantic understanding of your content. And again, the more structure you have in your HTML document, the easier it is for us to understand what we might pick. That doesn't mean that we always will agree with what you put there. So if a very specific query is addressed in a header or a headline in your, or a heading in your HTML document, then we might understand that that's a separate section, and we might actually pick that up. And we might understand that whatever follows this header is probably, or headline is probably important in terms of the description, but we might still figure out bits and pieces of the content at different places that are more relevant to the specific query at hand. I wouldn't worry too much about this kind of stuff, but generally, the more semantics you give us, the easier it is for us to understand what your content looks like and what the content structure looks like and how to use that for search results pages.
Excellent. And are there ways to sync up semantic HTML elements with schema to make sure that what's being fed to Google or accessible to Google instantly via schema markup is also reflecting what's marked up in the code of the semantic HTML?
Just to make sure that I understand that quite long-winded question correctly, is this about the fact that the schema markup information should match what's in the document?
Yes.
Yes. Yes, it should. I mean, it makes no sense to, and actually that's a big challenge or problem that websites face when the markup, so the actual content that the document represents and the document shows to the user, does not represent what is in the structured data, then there is a mismatch. I mean, obviously, if you are marking up, I don't know, like your organization or something, that doesn't have to be repeated in content on every page. If that is like in the structured data, and the structured data also is in the about page, for instance, that is fine. But if you are having product markup and then the product information on the page varies wildly from what is actually in your markup, then how would you think or how useful you think we would find that structured data? Because in the end, it is about what the user sees, but you can make it abundantly clear to us what we are looking at by specifying useful, legitimate structured data that mirrors what the page content shows to begin with.
Great, great. So we never want to do anything in our structured data markup that misrepresents content that's on the page itself.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
And that's the risky thing about using any sort of like automatic extraction tool, because if the extraction fails, or even worse, if you hard coded structured data from a separate source than the content of the page comes from, then you will inadvertently have drift where the content changes and the structured data doesn't, and then there's no correlation between the two anymore. And then what's the point of the structured data on the page?
A question that comes in from Tim Griffin is, Google is great at understanding text and semantic content, so semantic context. So he tends not to worry about that beyond making good content. But what parts of semantic search does Google need the most help with? So is there anything that he should focus on specifically from a semantic HTML perspective if the written content is being picked up fairly easily and understood by Google?
If you don't have problems with us picking up your content properly or understanding your content properly, then there's nothing else you need to worry about, because that's the only thing that it influences really, like how good are we going to understand the structure of your content. If we already do that well, that's fine.
Great, great. Okay, let me see here. We got a lot coming through, so this is pretty awesome. Everybody, please ask away. But I'd like to ask to keep the questions relevant to semantic HTML search and Google Search Console. Let's see here. I'd like to hear your opinion on header tags used in teaser elements, and then actually header tags as a whole. So this question from Hannah Road, she asks, should there not be header elements or H elements in teasers that are linking to other pages, or does Google understand that? And a bigger question I have is that a lot of developers that I work with utilize headers in different ways. They utilize headers to like differentiate sections of the site. They utilize headers to differentiate maybe, which is very odd, but internal notes. I've seen them utilize headers to highlight a piece of text or a piece of copy that they think should stand out, but it's not necessarily part of the overall content flow and content outline of the site itself. Could you go over the importance of headers, H1, H2, H3, from a content organization or outline perspective? And then also any misuses of headers, which may negatively impact the way Google understands on-site content.
Okay, so headers should generally be used to structure your content from an outline point of view. And the way that you want to do that depends a little bit on what you're doing. If you have one page with one topic, then each header might be basically that there should be like some sort of header that tells us what this entire thing is about, and then different sections can have different headers. Fine, absolutely legitimate. Alternatively, if you have multiple things that are kind of on the same level, let's say like you have a blog with excerpts from the different articles, then the main header might be describing your site or the blog, and then you might have a section header that tells you like archive of blog articles or something like that. And then like a further listed layer of headers that are introducing or demonstrating the individual articles that you're teasing here on this page. So there is no right or wrong with that. However, that being said, you should not use headers for non-outlining or structuring purposes. So using headers to mark up a piece of text that should stand out is not a good idea. And I tell you why it's not a good idea. Because there is such a thing as the outline algorithm that has nothing to do with Google. That is something that comes from the HTML. I think it's the WhatWG, but I'm not sure. It might also be W3C, and there's like two different versions of it, and I think browsers only implement the WhatWG version of it. Doesn't matter. The point is that accessibility tools, screen readers, and other tools that people might be using are relying on headers to structure how they understand the document. So if you are having random headlines in the middle of it, you are actually hurting a bunch of users along the way. That's not a good idea. That being said, Google search usually is reasonably good at guessing that's not what you meant, and then understanding that you just wanted to emphasize something with it. But the moment I'm saying we're good at guessing, that should make you concerned, because we shouldn't have to guess in the first place. So try to use your headers to structure the outline of your content, whatever that might look like specifically on your pages. That's not as important as people make it. So for instance, it's perfectly fine to have multiple H1 headers. It's also fine to decide, no, I want one H1 header and then everything else is an H2 or an H3, depending on how deep we want to nest. You can nest down to, I don't know, H6, H7, whatever. All of that is fine. Don't overthink it, but don't underthink it either, and don't abuse headers for styling purposes. That's what CSS is for. You can use the bold or emphasis or strong elements to make sure that individual pieces of content stand out that you find important. We understand those as well, but don't abuse them for these purposes.
And for those of you that may be working on site replatforming or redesigns or rebranding or whatever you want to call it, once you see once you get past the Figma stage and you start to see something done in staging, highly suggest checking how the developers are utilizing headers, because they can utilize headers for all of the ways that Martin just said confuse everyone, and also overall accessibility. So very important there, very important. Speaking of which, do you feel that a lot of sites are utilizing semantic HTML now? And is the responsibility of implementation of semantic HTML on the SEO or the developer? And then just adding to that, are there any business cases or use cases that you're aware of that can help someone within SEO make the case with the developer or the development team to implement semantic HTML?
Not sure of any case studies. That's for someone else to answer, I guess. But I think the responsibility to use semantic HTML lies with whoever has control over the content. If that is you, if you can actually supply certain HTML content into the website that you're managing, then that's with you. If you can't, and you basically just supply the text that then are being put together as HTML by a templating system, a CMS, whatever it is, that actually renders it out into HTML, then that I would say is with the developers. So it depends a little bit on your specific setup and how you are running your site, who is responsible for this.
Great. And then also, how accessible is semantic HTML within a WordPress Gutenberg style environment? And are there any plugins or add-ons that you're aware of that make it easier to code and implement
That's
that?
a good question. I don't know. I guess that highly depends on your theme and the settings, but I'm not aware of any specific accessibility issues or semantic HTML issues within Gutenberg or WordPress. So good question for that community, though.
Yes, maybe it's something I'll hit up Roger Monti about doing as well, since he's a WordPress fan boy. Let's see here. Oh, here's an interesting question. It kind of gets back into title tags, but a little bit of the header side as well. If for some reason someone cannot optimize page elements such as title tags or H1s, but they can update the existing content on the page itself, right? So maybe from a permissions standpoint, they can't get in there and do that, but they can make edits to the content. Will those edits to the content still rank well or increase the page's visibility if the page has good authority and high level backlinking?
That's a
Or
ranking question. I'm not answering ranking questions. What I can say, though, is if you are improving your content, that will reflect.
great. Okay, let me get to another one here. By the way, just to remind our audience, what types of questions are you not answering today?
Ranking questions. I would happily take, I don't know, like JavaScript questions as well. I can take a certain amount of crawling questions. Not that much interesting to say about that, to be honest, but I'm happy to take that as well. Just ranking questions are always off limits for me.
Gotcha. 100%. So let's get into a question that's a little bit more about Search Console and the understanding of markup on product pages. So recently, Search Console, I believe the way this works is that you used to only be able to integrate product feeds into Merchant Center by uploading a Merchant Center feed or a feed in the Merchant Center. Now there seems to be more communication or ability to sync with the information that Google can obtain via markup on product PDP pages on a website and sync that better in the Merchant Center itself. Is there any specific markup within a product page or a category page that's extremely important with Merchant Center understanding how products work, the pricing?
That's a fantastic Fantastic question for the shopping folks. No idea. Not my product area.
Yeah, got it. How compatible is semantic HTML with WCAG?
Very much compatible, because the web accessibility guidelines do rely on and actually emphasize the use of semantic HTML, and search uses semantic HTML as well. There's no incompatibilities, all as well. However, you want to do what the accessibility guidelines actually say and avoid ARIA usage as much as you can, wherever you can.
Did you read the next question in the list then?
No.
Okay, so the next question was, we use off-screen ARIA-only text for the visually impaired. We find that screen readers do much better when that content is structured within its own set of header tags. This ends up creating two sets of header tags on our own page, the on-page and the off-screen set. Does this end up diluting the value of on-page headers when doing this?
No,
not at all. So got that, Tyler Yoke? That does not dilute at all. What is the relationship of semantic HTML to the overall concept of the semantic web, RDF, etc.?
Well, so RDF and JSON LD and generally semantic data or structured data is a orthogonal concept, which means an independent concept of the semantic HTML concepts. Semantic HTML is more about explaining the structure and outline of a document, because as we discussed, this can look very different depending on what you're doing. Whereas structured data and with that RDFA and JSON LD and microformats try to map whatever is on a page to broader concepts. To give you an example, semantic HTML worries about things such as, there is a list of links. Is this list of links part of an article in a blog article that we are showing in the list of articles? Or is this list of links part of the navigation? Is this list of links part of the site header? Is this link list a part of links associated with a specific section? Is this linked list part of the footer of the document? So what, in the concept of the doc, or in the context of the document, does this list of links mean? Not what is the content of the web, what's being described here. It's more what we're looking at and where does it belong to and what's the general structure of the content. Whereas structured data would be like, this website explains or contains or constitutes 5 articles about these 5 different topics. Each of these topics is associated with a person who is an author of this or that article, and so on and so forth. So it maps to concepts that are being found on the page, whereas the semantic HTML usually pretty much focuses on what are the different parts of this page and how do they relate to each other.
Got you. Very cool. Let's take a break in questions for a second about semantic HTML. You're in Zurich. It's currently winter. Are you a fan of fondue?
Oh, absolutely, yes.
Have you taken the fondue tram this season?
I haven't taken it this season because I find it quite cheesy, pun intended. But I would definitely recommend the fondue ship, though.
Ooh, nice.
Or the fondue boat rather than the ship.
Nice. It's probably a little bit more airy too, because I can imagine being in the fondue tram. You just like reek of cheese after leaving.
Pretty much.
And you don't want to get in the
cheese for days.
Yeah, you don't want to get in the office and sit next to John, because I know he's a huge cheese fan. If you've been on the fondue tram before.
Okay. I might earn you bonus points with John if you're reeking of cheese.
I didn't even know there was a fondue boat. That's awesome. Okay, back to our regularly scheduled program. Okay, I kind of lost myself here because the questions are popping up left and right. There was a specific question about image thumbnails being utilized in the search results, and this is not a ranking question. This is more of a visibility and how to communicate with Google. So this person has an issue with their product thumbnails or image thumbnails, sometimes appearing, sometimes not appearing. Sometimes it's a wrong thumbnail. Sometimes the thumbnail does not represent the specific product. Can that be rectified utilizing semantic HTML variables to declare which image is the best thumbnail for mobile and now desktop search results?
It's tricky when we have to take that from the side from random images in the document. It's not really, there's not really semantic HTML to very specifically say this is an image that I want associated with this product, person, organization, article, whatever. If you want to do that, semantic data as in structured data is probably the right way to go. So if it is something that has structured data available to describe it, it's probably a better idea to try to rectify it through that. The other thing is if you place images in the context or in the vicinity of the concept that you're talking about in your document, that usually rectifies these problems as well, which would bring us back to semantic HTML, because then if things that are meaningfully close to each other are also structurally close to each other, that generally is a good idea.
Gotcha. This is also a relevant. I'm getting a lot of e-commerce product and category page oriented questions coming in, and forgive me if this is outside of your realm.
It's fine.
Hannah Road has an issue with product variants not being accepted from Google. They have unique URLs for each product, and in the markup, point to related products into the product model itself. So what I'm guessing here is things like a blue shirt, a red shirt, maybe a long sleeve version of the SKU, maybe this, maybe that, that are utilized via maybe Shopify filters or an e-commerce filter or something along those lines. Is there a way to get the different product URLs indexed if Google is not necessarily indexing the variants themselves? Or to get the
I don't know enough about the product situation going on, especially when this question might be pointing towards shopping. I don't know.
Yeah. Gotcha. Okay, 1 second. So this is a question about schema markup. Also from Hannah. She asks, it's a best practice to utilize organization markup on homepage, about page. What is it? Homepage, about page, and maybe contact page to get pure organization information, but not across the entire site. Is that correct?
Yeah, would say so.
Okay, so is there another type of schema markup on article pages or internal pages to still refer to the organization itself, in addition to utilizing ID or same as or something like that to more or less reflect the organization or the entity without having the organization markup on every page?
I would use same as or refer to the ID. That's exactly what they are made for. I don't see why that would not be a good idea. Alternatively, if you want to, you can nest the information into one blob, but eventually that gets really, really cumbersome. So I would rather probably just refer to pages or refer to the entities that you marked up elsewhere.
So with the same as markup, typically we see people utilizing that probably because of the default within Yoast to like for Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, whatever for the company. Are there any other types of company footprints or entity footprints that should be utilized in the same as that better lets Google know what the company is, what the organization is, and then connect the dots in terms of that entity footprint on the web?
Not that I'm aware of.
So, like Wikipedia, for example.
Yeah, but I'm not sure how we would use that. So I think don't know is the best answer I can get to that question.
Got you. Got you. Let's see here. Nicholas asks, there are different takes on if font size is. Oh, this is a ranking question. Um,
They are hiding well, aren't they?
we're gonna skip that one. Does Google understand the semantic meaning of H dash group as opposed to H on the header side itself? How different are those two?
What is an H-group?
I'm not sure. Hannah, if you can get back into what is an H dash group, that would be fantastic.
I'm not sure I understand that question.
Here's another question. So with schema markup or basic markup, you can mark up breadcrumbs structures, right? And breadcrumbs, HTML breadcrumb structures on the page itself. If, for example, if a site's been developed, or if its infrastructure has a different path than the breadcrumb markup. So let's take Shopify, for example, right? Shopify, typically the collections pages live on their own, and then the product pages are not necessarily nested underneath the collections pages, right? So in a WP Commerce environment, you would typically have website / socks / giraffe socks, right? And then Google's like, well, that's nested underneath the category of socks, therefore these should be socks and everything else, but not necessarily in a Shopify environment. So within Shopify, if you can add the schema that shows that breadcrumb structure as item line markup, and or alter the HTML, which also shows that as that product being nested underneath the category, is that useful for Google understanding that that product specifically lives within that category and reinforces that category itself? Or is that different? Is having the markup more defined, does that override to an extent or make it easier to understand the page's categorization when that's not necessarily reflected within the URL structure itself?
I would say yes, because the more information, the more signals you're giving us, and the clearer these signals are, the better it is, or the likelier it is that we understand what you're trying to do there.
Gotcha. Good. So, okay, this is a really good question, and I've seen this a lot, and I've been asked this a lot. Rebecca Logan asks, is preserving header hierarchy more important than which header you use? For example, if for any reason an H2 is utilized instead of an H1 for a page topic, maybe due to font size issues or not being able to access basic things like CSS, et cetera, would Google then understand that the H3 in this scenario, so let's say H2 is the topic or title of the page, and then H3s are utilized where H2s would typically be. Utilizing an H3 in this scenario where the H2 is acting as H1 is an important topic of the page. So
So in the sense of the HTML just doesn't have an H1 and the H1 is replaced with an H2?
Yes.
Yeah, that's fine. It's suboptimal and it's weird for the accessibility technology picking it up. So I would rectify it if I could. But for search, we're just like seeing, okay, for some weird reason, the highest level element is an H2, and then there's nesting below it. Fine. Not
Gotcha.
great, but fine.
Not great, but fine. I've seen this before when a developer sets up all of the formatting for the core site with H1, H2, H3 elements, and they have different font sizes than they typically would. And then you set up the blog afterwards and say if it's all within one WordPress environment, and then the sizing is off when you're trying to organize it within the blog or whatever. So you have to try to dedicate different CSS elements per template. That's something you should really nip in the butt when you're in the staging and testing and Figma
Yeah.
for all of that.
By the way, I just really quickly Googled H group, and a few people have posted it in the chat and in the Q&A as well. I think we understand H group. Nonetheless, if you use section or article for that, that kind of has the same effect as far as I understand.
Great. Here's a question. There's a lot of this that goes on within e-commerce as well. Is it bad practice to display different content on pages to returning users versus new users? So there's so many personalization. There's so many personalization solutions out there that say, hey, this person's been on the site before. They search for this. They bought this type of product. So when they go to the homepage, that type of product that they're interested in, or maybe they abandoned in the cart, is showcased on the homepage.
That's fine. From a search perspective, that's fine.
That's fine because you're not picking up what, like, if you were on this, if you personally were on the site and you're going to buy some hand cream, and then Googlebot goes to the site, they're not going to necessarily see that hand cream was like that. That's changed. They're going to see the default.
Yeah, that's okay.
Okay, great.
That might lead to not necessarily Google seeing the content that you think Google is seeing, but that's fine. If you understand that, if you understand what you just said, Lauren, then you'll be fine.
Okay. How important is it to provide a video thumbnail, and would that impact video indexation at all?
I don't know specifically if that's a requirement for video indexation, and I don't want to speak for the video team particularly without making sure that I have my facts checked. But what I can say is that for the user, it is a difference, and it's also a performance difference if you are showing a thumbnail and then load the video in the background. So definitely worthwhile.
Here's a follow-up question, and I think this is more of a Search Console question. I've run into various instances where companies have embedded a YouTube video within their content, and then we get a warning from Search Console that video elements are missing specific markup. Is that something people should be worried about? Should that be provided in the embed code that you're putting on your site anyway?
I guess if it's a warning from Search Console, that probably comes from recommendations and best practices coming from the video team. I would consider fixing it.
Okay, good. Okay, Marco says in the past weeks he's been starting to get notifications from Google Search Console about not being able to identify an outstanding video in the website. Can you explain a little bit more about this, and what are your recommendations for markup in semantic HTML and or schema for Google Search Console to better understand this video placement?
For videos, there are a bunch of very specific requirements that the video team is on top of, and I'm not. So I'd rather not say something that turns out to not be helpful or true. Definitely, I would redirect the question to the search help community where people can route these to the right people to answer the question. I'm not the right person to answer that question, unfortunately.
Gotcha. Okay. Donald Hines asks, my client has a single page application, an SPA. HTTP status codes that are 400 or 500 are not being handled correctly by the server. What are the best practices for error handling when working with SPAs?
To have a server that handles these situations correctly. I think I explained that in the documentation as well. There are ways to deal with that. So for instance, I know exactly what you're dealing with, because what happens is that pretty much the server doesn't really do much in terms of handling requests. It basically just gives out a 200 request for whatever URL you are handling it. And then the client-side JavaScript decides, oh no, this is actually an error, which then leads to soft 404s and potentially gnarly situations. Same with 500 error codes in single page applications, similar story. What you can do, however, is if you understand that it's a 404, you have two options, because there's two things that can happen that you don't want happening. One is an error page gets indexed and shows up in search results where it shouldn't. The other thing is that you are creating 404s that show up in Search Console and probably muddle with your data. So to avoid these two things, what you can do is you can either dynamically use that JavaScript that determines, oh, this is an error condition, to also add a meta no index into or meta robots no index into the HTML, so that these pages then don't necessarily end up being indexed. However, that is a relatively nuclear option, because usually no index sticks around a little longer and is more persistent than 404s. The alternative is to designate a specific URL, like /not-found or something, where the server always responds with a 404, and then using JavaScript to redirect to that page. In that case, Google Search will render the page, run the JavaScript determines this page doesn't exist, redirects to the 404 page. We get the 404, so we decide, okay, so the original page is a 404 because it now redirects to something that is a 404. That has the benefit that we do continue to crawl 404 responses a little more aggressively than we do with no indexed URLs, so that if this page ever comes back into existence or happens to just have been gone by mistake or something, then it's a little easier to get these things back. But both ways are definitely possible and reasonable ways to deal with that situation.
That's an excellent answer. I think we're going to try and describe that answer and work with you into putting that together on a post or as part of the. Thank you very much for that in-depth answer to that question and solution to that question.
Sure.
If there are any more questions on rendering and Google understanding or not understanding different header codes, errors, or whatever, just please put that into the Q&A. We're 45 minutes in already, Martin.
I know. Time's flying.
All right. Yeah. You okay? You need a breather?
I'm fine. No, I'm fine.
Okay. Good. All right. Here's an interesting question. I've seen this pop up a lot within Search Console errors as well. So actually, Google does a much better job of differentiating this than Bing does. But Angelique has seen a spike in .atom files, along with, let's also add the /feed. That's kind of a default within a WordPress setting on the end of every single article, right? It being picked up by Search Console, not necessarily indexed, but at least picked up, as warning or whatever. And she's wondering if this spike can lead to traffic or visibility suffering. So is there a way, should the .atom files, if they're not needed, just be taken down and or redirected to the core post that they were originally attached to?
It doesn't cause any problems, so unless it's annoying you in Search Console, then I wouldn't waste much time or energy on that, to be honest. If you can take them down, sure, do that. If you want to take them down, go ahead. You don't have to. I don't see that as a necessity, I would say.
Got you. What would you say is the best way to deal with, this question comes from David Oppenheim. What is the best way to deal with search query parameters being indexed in Google? Is that something that should be addressed in the robots.txt, or is there a more efficient way to handle and instruct Google not to index search query parameters and or other specific URL parameters?
That was a long question. We're 45 minutes in. I'm very sorry. Can you repeat that question? It's something about search parameters showing up or being indexed in search.
Yeah. So, yeah, parameters being indexed in search,
right?
Especially search query parameters. What's the best and most efficient way to block that from happening?
If you can robot them out without shooting yourself in the foot, because robots.txt is a big gun, sure, that's one way to deal with it. The other thing is how I'm not so sure how bad it is if we just index it and then eventually throw it out of the index again. So this sounds a lot like a problem that most often is not really that much of a problem. If you are worried about the crawl budget, then roboting is the way to go. If you're worried about it ending up in the index, then no indexing is probably the better way. Redirecting is always a risky thing to do. I would argue either no indexing it or roboting it out, or ignoring it if you don't need to worry about it to begin with.
Here's a question. Another is visually hidden CSS. Is that a spammy content tactic? They found Apple using it for H1 tags. Is utilizing visually hidden in the CSS or visually hidden CSS to insert content something that can get a site spanked by Google?
No.
Okay.
That was an easy one, wasn't it?
It was an easy one. It was an easy one. Here's another question. This is a Shopify-oriented question. So, if someone's uploading a sitemap from WordPress, let's say Yoast, for example, it's very simple. It's the index, the post, the pages, and then if they allow authors and everything else to be indexed, it's all right there, right? So within a Shopify environment, Shopify has the main collection sitemap, the core sitemap, I guess. But then for their product sitemap, for some reason, Shopify by default has a parameter in their XML sitemap URL that identifies specific products only or groups of products. Is that something they should be worried about if those product pages are not included within that XML sitemap?
I mean, generally the products and everything that you have in terms of content should be reachable through your site, so it should be able to navigate it through links. With regards to sitemaps at Shopify, I'm not super sure. I don't fully understand the problem that this creates that you described. But if you're worried about it, I think Shopify's support is probably the best address to bring up that question.
Great. Let's talk to Shopify about that then. Okay, so there, I'm not going to mention the tools, but there are a number of site auditing tools that flag things like the title tag having the same content as the H1 being an issue, and or multiple H1s on a page being an issue. Is there such a thing, first of all, as the title tag and the H1 tag having the same content being an issue with Google and its understanding of the page itself? Did you say no?
Yeah, because it isn't.
It's not. So that's made up. Okay, good. Okay. Also, next question. If there are two H1s on a page that have different content, are the H1s fighting over which one has the most weight or value for Google crawl and how Google is prioritizing the header structure within that content?
That's such a weird question.
I see it a lot, though. I see it a lot.
Yeah. No. This question, it's bananas because the question keeps coming up. Like this is not the first time. This will not be the last time that this question comes up.
It's been asked for 20 years. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and it will continue to be asked. Again, I don't know why everyone is like thinking about what value or who. It's about structure, and I can't emphasize this enough. If you choose to have H1s as your top level structure of the content, that's fine. Then it just means that the top level of the content is structured along the H1s. If you have one H1 and then like nothing else under it except for H2s and then content H2 and then content H2, then that doesn't change anything. That just means like, okay, you structured your content differently. You didn't structure it better. You didn't structure it worse. You just structured it differently. But both of these structures make sense. If you're choosing H1 to be your overall title, that doesn't mean that it's valued more or that it means more to anyone, search users, whoever. It just means that you're introducing a different level and then different sub-levels of that. It doesn't matter. It really, really does not make a difference if you have like an H1 and then H2, 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 or if you have H1 content, H1 content, H1 content. All of this basically just means there is not this overall document level H1 heading, but that one we kind of get from the title already, so it doesn't really make that much of a difference in practice. So I don't know where that thing comes from, but fundamentally it doesn't make that much of a difference.
Got you. So just to recap, even though the tool that you're utilizing, your auditing tool that you're utilizing may give you a red flag because your title tag and your H1 on the page are the same content, that's not an issue with Google. Two,
not for Google search, no.
Not for Google search. Could be maybe for other search engines, but not for Google search. And then two, if you have two H1s on the page or whatever, that just means that you've structured your outline differently. It does not necessarily mean that they're fighting over each other or confusing Google or anything like that. It's to your point, it's different, not better, not worse, but different.
Yeah, absolutely correct. And it's interesting to see that like people are getting very, very caught up on this. If you're interested in how this kind of stuff looks like and works, there's a web tool called Wave, WAVE, .webaim.org, and that allows you in the structure tab, once you have typed in any, I don't know, let's try nytimes.com. I think that has some structure. Yeah, there we go. It basically has a structure tab, and that is how accessibility tools and also search engines and pretty much everyone else will see the structure of your content. And the structure just differs on how you want to do it, but it doesn't really influence much besides that. And for instance, New York Times does it quite interesting. Like the first title, the first heading that I see that is actually representing an article is an H3, and then we have like an H5 in the navigation and stuff. Interesting choice to have like an H3 followed by an H5, but A bit weird, but it works. It structures the content just as well as an H4 under an H3 would have done. It would have been nicer to not skip levels because it might sound weird in screen readers, but besides that,
If it's set up within the CSS, or H size is infinite, can you do an H1000?
I don't think so. I think the HTML elements pretty much specify how deep you can go, and I think H6 is the deepest standardized.
I'm going to build
element.
a site just using H6s and see what I can do with that.
And again, here's the thing: like structure and presentation are separated. That's the beauty of HTML and CSS. You can make an H3 look like just another paragraph if that's what you need to do. You can make an H2 look bigger than an H1 if that's what you need to do. That's a bit stupid, but if that's what you need to do to keep the semantic HTML structure that you should have, which is a clear structuring with levels ascending the deeper you go in the structure, that's perfectly possible.
How important is it for developers and SEOs to start implementing semantic HTML now? Is this critical?
No.
It's
not critical. It just helps us, or again, accessibility technology for people with impairments or disabilities, to better understand and navigate your content. But if you have been seeing search picking up what you needed to pick up already, then I wouldn't waste resources on changing the structure. Just don't make it worse. And if you're building something new, do it right from the get-go. Would be nice.
This question came up a couple times about case, title case, uppercase versus lowercase, and sometimes the SERP's not reflecting that. So it looks like there's been an increase in titles in the SERPs being lowercase, even when on the page itself it's title case. So, you know, Martin starts with the big M, and then the rest is like little letters, and then Splitt. So, but in the SERPs it would be lowercase m, Martin, and Splitt. Is there a reason why that's happening? Is that a coding issue? Is that a CSS issue? Are you familiar with any of those cases coming up, just in case?
Not familiar with any of those cases, but an interesting observation for sure.
Yeah, because there is worry that it does reflect CTR. Click, like, even though something's ranked, it's lowercase, and then everything else is regular title case. Great. We have a couple minutes left. Are there any talking points, anything you like to bring up in terms of semantic HTML, Google Search Console, etc., that folks should really be focusing on right now, that you may feel that SEOs or developers are overlooking on that end?
I would say make sure that you are focusing on the content quality and that you are focusing on delivering value to your users. Those have been, will always be, and are right now the most important things. And everything else should follow from that. If you're spending time on fine-tuning technical details, or if you're spending time on fine-tuning the structure or the markup of your website, you are likely missing out on the bigger opportunities, which is to ask yourself, what are people actually needing from our website? What do they expect from our website? And how can we deliver that better, faster, and in a more pleasant way?
Will citations that are utilized in Google Bard be visible within Google Search Console, so site owners will know which question and answer segments they were featured in?
I don't have a crystal ball that tells me the future.
You don't have a magic 8 ball either?
I don't. Unfortunately not. Too young for that.
Okay. Oh, I just aged myself. Thank you.
Didn't mean
Martin,
to.
No problem. Martin, it's been a pleasure. Where can everyone find you online?
I'm on Twitter and Mastodon. If you're looking for Martin Splitt, you'll likely find me on Twitter, and on Mastodon I am Geekonaut at mastodon.social, if I remember correctly.
Great. It's been a real pleasure catching up with you today. Thank you for putting up with this tornado of questions.
Oh, thanks to everyone who asked any questions. And by the way, because I got a comment on that H1 versus H2 question, I'm not angry with those asking. It's perfectly fine to ask these questions. What I am angry with is that there are things and tools that are saying things like, as we have heard, like, oh, the title can't have the same content as the H1 and stuff like that, when that is not a thing you should look out for or you should invest time in. So I understand where the question is coming from. It is unfortunate that this gets so much attention because there are other things that should get attention that are not getting attention. So yeah.
Yes.
Has been a pleasure. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. We'll look out for that tool data in the future. Thank you for everyone for attending today's special webinar here on Search Engine Journal with Martin Splitt. Martin, thank you for showing up. It's been fantastic. I hope you have a great it's Thursday. Well, yeah,
the rest of the week.
Yeah, I hope you have a great rest of the week. A great rest of the week, and talk to you later.
Thank you so much, Lauren, and thanks everyone for joining us and everyone who asked questions. Stay safe, take care, and bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.